So an Instagram account called The Biblical Birth School recently made a post about antinatalism, which I thought was pretty wild. So I wanted to go through it panel by panel and give my thoughts. Now, before we get into the post itself, obviously this account and the woman who runs it is a Christian, so they're coming from a religious perspective. And in the description of the post, they've referred to antinatalism as being dark and demonic. Where have we heard this before?
Evil, Satan. It's because you don't believe in God. You need God.
So let's go through the post. So the post starts with just this title page of antinatalism in the church. So I'm getting the idea that she thinks that antinatalism is actually making its way into the church. Not just that it's attacking Christianity, it's a threat to Christianity, but it's actually infiltrated the church. And then on the second panel, she actually defines what she sees as antinatalism, or what she thinks antinatalism is. So she says, antinatalism is the belief that it is morally wrong or unjustifiable to have children. This belief manifests itself on a spectrum from supporting human extinction to procreative cautiousness. Okay, so there's a lot to get into here. So obviously she's not going to have thought about antinatalism as much as someone like I have, because I run a channel specifically on that topic, right? Obviously I'm going to quibble with her definition of antinatalism, but I think she's generally aiming in the right direction. So I wouldn't say that the view is that it's unjustifiable to have children. I would say that it's morally wrong to create sentient beings, because obviously you can have children and it be completely justified by fostering them, adopting them, or maybe you've just already procreated before you came across antinatalism. It is justified to continue having those children and looking after them. No one is saying once you're an antinatalist you have to reject the children you already have. But I think this was probably more just like lazy or uninformed wording on her part rather than anything else. So the next thing to comment on is her talking about the belief manifests itself on a spectrum, right? Which I guess is true. Like, different antinatalists will hold different specific opinions. I don't know if I'd refer to it as a spectrum, but yeah, there's an array of antinatalist interpretations. So the first one she says, and I've already read out, is supporting human extinction. Fair enough, lots of antinatalists do. And the second one is procreative cautiousness. Now, that's kind of vague. I don't exactly know what she means by procreative cautiousness, but if she simply means like someone hesitating a bit or being considered about when they should have children or how many they should have, rather than going completely gung-ho and just like letting it rip and having a kid like, you know, every other year or something. If that's what she means by procreative cautiousness, then that's just like general family planning. I don't feel like that has anything to do with antinatalism. Many people around the world practice some form of family planning and procreative cautiousness, and they've never even heard of antinatalism. So it's not even like they aren't consciously being antinatalist, but that antinatalism has somehow subconsciously impacted them. I don't even think it's that. There's areas of the world where people just won't have heard about antinatalism because there's no literature on it in the language they speak, and they probably live in a very pronatalist culture. Maybe it's a very religious culture, but even people in those cultures will practice some form of like cautiousness in their fertility choices. So I feel like this spectrum she's painting is way bigger than the actual spectrum of antinatalism. Okay, panel 3. So if antinatalism is the root of the tree, then the fruit of the tree is birth control, sterilization, abortion, child-free, eugenics, climate change. I have no fucking idea how she thinks climate change is caused by antinatalism, but whatever. Being good stewards of fertility, and so much more. Okay, so birth control, ridiculous. Many people use birth control, and it's not because they think procreation is unjustifiable or morally wrong. They're not antinatalist. They simply don't want to have a child at that specific point in time, or they only want to have a specific amount of children so that, for example, they have enough resources to give them all an expected reasonable life. Nothing to do with antinatalism. That is just straightforward family planning. Obviously, antinatalists use birth control unless they're abstinent, but I'm assuming most antinatalists aren't abstinent, so obviously antinatalists will use birth control, but the vast majority of people using birth control are not antinatalist, and there's no inkling of antinatalism permeating their choice to use birth control. The next one was sterilization. Same point applies. Antinatalists will get sterilized, some of them, but most of the people getting sterilized will not be antinatalist. Another one is abortion. Same applies. Child-free. Same applies even there. Like, a lot of antinatalists will be child-free, but most people who decide not to have children, it won't be for antinatalist reasons. I don't know if there's surveys on this. There probably are some out there. If anyone knows of any, please put them in the comments. I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that most people who don't have children, it's not going to be for antinatalist reasons. It'll it'll be lifestyle reasons, or they just don't have the money at the time, all of this sort of stuff. I could maybe understand a bit that recently there's probably been an uptick in people not having children for ethical reasons. Maybe it's not like full-fledged antinatalism, but it's something like they're concerned about the general state of the world. In other conditions, they may have children, but in these specific conditions, they think it's probably not okay to, at least for them. So, like, yeah, maybe more recently, child-free is a bit more associated with ethical considerations rather than antinatalism. But overall, no, child-free and antinatalism are not as linked as she's making out. The next one was eugenics. Eugenics is very different from antinatalism. Antinatalism says that no one should procreate. Eugenics is about cultivating specific genes or characteristics in the population and controlling who procreates. So very different concept. Climate change, I have no... The way she's phrased it here is that she thinks climate change is a fruit of antinatalism. Obviously, it's not. But I think what she's getting at maybe is that antinatalism is on the rise because of concerns about climate change, which is not how she's framing it here, but I think that's probably what she means. I think it's just sloppy writing. So actually climate change would be the root and antinatalism would be a fruit. But yeah, I can, if that's the way she intended it, which is not how it's written, but if that's the way she intended it, then okay, yeah, like the worsening situation of climate change and environmental degradation generally, along with other things going on in the world, yes, that is probably going to lead to an uptick in antinatalism. I don't know if it's been researched, so I don't know if we have any data on it, but it seems reasonable to me that the more concern there is about climate change, the more people will be refraining from procreation as a result of that. The next one is being good stewards of fertility. So I actually don't know really what she means by this. I think maybe she means like procreating in a responsible way. So not having like 8 kids and then you struggle to feed them all, but you have like 1 or 2 and they, you know, have access to a lot more resources than the 8 would if you had 8 children. So again, I would just refer back to what I said about the fertility cautiousness, or however she phrased it. Like, I think that is just fertility cautiousness and like appropriate family planning. I don't think that is antinatalism at all. So the next panel is specifically in church, antinatalism looks like prioritizing ministry over procreation, seeing children as a blessing unless there's too many, and being labeled as unwise if you don't use protection. So I guess to some extent she is kind of correct in that I wouldn't call it antinatalism, but in many religions there are specific groups in that religion that tend to be more committed to the faith that won't procreate. So a lot of like nuns, priests, monks in different religions. There are people who will commit their life to the faith, and as part of that they don't have a child because that would distract away from their commitment to God or the faith. I don't know if she is implying this, but like I don't think that's a modern thing, that like that's always been around. It's pretty accepted in the church. So she seems to be taking issue with like nuns and priests and monks and people like this, which is kind of strange because they are often pillars of the religious community. Maybe what she means is like ordinary members of a congregation of a church not having children so that they can then attend to church duties more. I don't know why she would have an issue with that, because that is basically just what a priest is doing as well. But if she has an issue with that, okay, fair enough, whatever. Seeing children as a blessing unless there's too many, and being labeled as unwise if you don't use protection. So yeah, she's obviously like a more conservative flavor of a Christian. As it comes up more later, she like very heavily demonizes the use of contraception. So obviously I don't frame procreation or the creation of a child as like a blessing, but in her framing, if you view children as a blessing, I do kind of get her point of like too many children meaning they're less of a blessing wouldn't really make sense. Like surely every child is a blessing if you're viewing it in that way. So I can kind of get what she means there, but the idea that in a religious context it being viewed as unwise to not use any protection or exercise family planning, yeah, the idea that that is unwise is probably a sensible one, especially if you know that you carry, say, a hereditary disease, or you've just reached your limit for the amount of children that you can have with the resources that you have at your disposal. If you've gotten to a point where if you have another child, it would mean that you could allocate less resources to the children you already have, and their standard of living or your ability to cater to their needs would start slipping, then yeah, it's probably unwise to continue having sex in an unprotected way. I'm not sure why she would demonize that. That is just that's in the best interests of the person, get their head underwater, and it would be in the best interest of the children who are already there, who presumably in the Christian sense you see them as God's creation, so they're worthy of obviously giving them the best shot that they can have. The next panel is we've become so obsessed with the idea it of being wise that we use wisdom as the reason to destroy perfectly good body parts in sterilization or end the lives of our own children in TFMR. I actually don't know what TFMR is, so I'm just going to leave that. Maybe I am like massively ignorant and everyone watching this knows what TFMR is, so I'm just going to leave that part. But yeah, so she's basically saying that like wisdom has gone too far if it's leading you to like mutilate part of your body, right? So get sterilized. Why? There are a plethora of ways that people will change their body through surgery because it is the wise thing to do. People who have asthma can get certain surgery so that it improves their breathing, or if you've had an injury, you get a surgery in order to at least attempt to get back to the capacities that you had before. There are many ways that people elect voluntarily for surgery to change their body in such a way where you consider it an improvement. And if someone doesn't want to have children, thinks it's wrong, or has just had children already and they don't want any more and they're very comfortable with how things are, they can elect to get a sterilization. At least for men, it's a very simple, straightforward procedure. It is not a high risk procedure. The recovery is generally very quick and you can go on living your life happily. The female sterilization is slightly more complicated, but to my knowledge, it's not a particularly complicated procedure in the grand scheme of things, but I am less informed on that. But the idea that there's like a corrupting wisdom that is leading people to mutilate themselves. Look, if you want to phrase it as mutilating yourself, then whatever. I don't agree with that framing, but if you want to use that framing, then whatever, have at it, Hoss. But basically what someone is doing is electing for a surgery to change their body in such a way where it's going to make their life so much more convenient. They're not going to end up doing, or it's much less likely that they're going to do something they find unethical or unplanned or something they just don't want to do. And it's their body. They have control over it. They can do with it as they wish. Why is it any of this woman's business if other people get sterilized when they think it's appropriate or sensible to be sterilized? And the next panel is, we were once a nation that understood that birth control was a product of immorality. In 1873, Congress passed the Comstock Act. This new law defined contraception as obscene and illicit, making it a federal offense to disseminate it. Well, luckily, we don't live in those times anymore. Luckily, contraception is relatively widely accessible and available to people. I know in some parts of the world it still isn't massively accessible. It's still like demonized to some extent, often by religions. And there are rollbacks in some areas of the world on access to abortion as well. But even if we just take like one of the least controversial forms of contraception, although I know it is still controversial to people like her, say the condom, for example, right? So she thinks the condom is a product of immorality. People having access to a technology that allows them much more control over their own fertility is immoral for a reason that is escaping me. The authoritarian leanings of this woman are pretty wild. The fact that she essentially wants to live in a theocracy where she can use her religious dictates to control the fertility decisions of people that she's never met. That's pretty wild. The fact that, let's say, a family with like 5 children. So they've had 5 children. Surely she's happy with this family because they've had 5 children. The fact that the couple then can't just say, okay, we're not going to have any more children anymore. We want to continue having sex because that's part of our relationship and bonding and this sort of stuff. But we want to introduce a technology into our sexual lives that helps us not get pregnant again so that we don't have any more children. Look, we've had 5. Cool your boots. We do not need any more children. Why would this biblical birth school lady not want those people to have access to contraception so that they can continue having a meaningful relationship where sex is part of that? They've already had like 5 children. What is the immorality about introducing a technology into that situation so that they can facilitate the good things in their lives, focus on the children they've already had, and not bring any more children into the world? Where is the immorality in that? So the next panel is the Comstock Act came to fruition because of one man, Anthony Comstock, a devout Christian who served in the Civil War and was later burdened by the problems he saw in society that were fueled by promiscuity and contraception. To be honest, I don't have anything to say on this slide, so let's move on. So the next panel. The only reason you're not concerned about antinatalism is because you don't understand its supporters. The amount of deep-seated, seething, wicked hatred antinatalists have for children is very real. Do not underestimate it. They would rather die than admit children make people happy. All right, everyone prepare yourselves. Children make some people happy. And I would much rather have said that than kill myself. And it was extremely easy to say that because it's true. Having children makes many people happy. Not everyone. And actually the research I've seen is that people who have children actually on average aren't any happier than people who don't have children. But yes, for some people, having children will make them happier than they would have been without children. This is not hard to admit. This is not an affront to antinatalism. This is not something that people need to shy away from or hide. This is like a very common sense observation. But anyway, moving on from that silliness. So she says that a lot of antinatalists have, let's see, a lot of antinatalists have deep-seated, seething, wicked hatred for children. Look, don't get me wrong. There are some antinatalists out there that don't like children. There are also many non-antinatalists out there that don't like children. There are people out there who don't like children and just choose not to have them. Not for any moral reason or anything like that. They just don't want children because they don't like them. They don't like other people's children, but they're not against other people having children. So that's the first thing to clear up. But yes, there are some antinatalists who hate children. I disagree with those antinatalists, but everyone is entitled to their opinion. I would disagree with them and say they shouldn't like be spreading vitriol and hatred towards children. You can have that belief, but keep it to yourself. But yeah, I disagree with them. Like, I like children. They can often bring a lot of joy to you when you're interacting with them. It's enjoyable to see them enjoying themselves because of the sort of innocence they have. And this is not in conflict with antinatalism. So I can understand where she's coming from. Maybe she has been exposed to certain antinatalists that have been spreading child hatred online. I've made a video on why I think it doesn't make sense to spread child hatred as an antinatalist or just in general. I'll put a link in the description. But yeah, maybe she's been exposed to those specific antinatalists. In my experience, they make a small minority of antinatalists, but they do exist. So yeah. And the final panel is antinatalism is a cancer that we have let grow unchecked. Christians have slowly over time let antinatalist views seep into our homes, minds, and bodies. We have followed the evils of feminism, choice, and the pattern of the world, and now we must repent. You heard it here first, folks. Women having a choice is evil. People having access to contraception is evil. Antinatalism is evil, and you must repent.
All right, I am the Messiah!